Dónal, thanks very much for coming down to Queally's pub this morning. Have you been in this spot before?
Probably, Alan, probably many moons ago. I was probably in every hostelry in this town. About 50 years ago.
Okay.
But no, not consciously. I can't honestly remember. I think it was closed when I came to live here.
Yeah.
It had closed.
Cool.
So.
Well, yeah, you're living in the town now, but we'll get there, as they say. But we'll go back to your roots. So you're from Drogheda in County Louth. So maybe you can just tell us about what part of the town you're from and maybe your earliest memories of music in the town, where any time.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. As they say, it's quite amusing, really. The town centre is now officially known as downtown. So I was born. I don't know if you're familiar with the act which is associated, the symbol of Drogheda, the Lawrence's Gate, which translated is St. Lawrence Gate, and you go up St. Lawrence Street. And I was born about 100 yards from Lawrence's Gate, in behind the Whitworth Hall, which is sort of significant in terms of music. That was back in the 1840s, I think. The MP was a Whitworth. As you can tell, hardly a traditional Drogheda name. But he was a bit of a benefactor, and he set up this public hall that was used as a dance hall, mainly, I suppose, I think it hosted boxing matches at various points. But I always associated with with bands practicing there, bands playing, dance bands. And the little laneway I was born in was near the rear exit of the Whitworth Hall. So there was always toing and froing. Oh yeah, they said they would put on little productions. For example, Anya McMaster. Does that ring about the actor manager?
It does not for me, no.
No, well, that's an interesting, one itself. They would do sort of pocket-sized versions of Macbeth and Hamlet and, Victorian melodrama.
And those bands you would hear, they were like show bands?
This is pre-show bands,
okay.
Really. There would be dance bands, and they'd have a singer who would be resplendent and large gowns, probably sewn by the likes of my mother, who was a demon at that sort of stuff.
And was there any any music within your own family?
No, really unfortunate in that respect. No, my father's from Fermanagh, as the name would suggest. He was a runner-in from Fermanagh. My mother was, she was local, but there was no music. There was a story that my Uncle Johnny, who lived with us, said he was a good step dancer. But that was always described in, I suppose the point I'm getting at, there was always this sort of, this was associated with, rather sort of primitive sort of music, dance, like bog music, that sort of thing. The sort of experience that a lot of people had in up and down, you forget about that sort of stuff. Let's, move forward. The sort of thing that your man in Chicago commented on, the lengths that recent immigrants would go to forget all about their music and culture because it was a source of embarrassment, And the way it was discussed, you'd hear my father once. I started playing the mandolin when I was about 19, and I had 3 or 4 tunes, and I was living in London at the time, and I went up and I was playing my what I thought was the cool, and my father took it off me and said, "That's not right." I started playing it. Now, he skipped it over the notes, with the plectrum. He never gave a mandolin to your Auntie Flo with a plectrum and said, "Here, play Three Blind Mice, she might struggle." But he just started playing. I said, well, I said, why did you never mention this? Why did you never talk about that? Don't sure that's her. your Auntie Bay used to trick around with the fella. Sort of stuff. I said, did you trick around? But look, I wasn't interested in that sort of. I never heard him sing a song. I never heard either of my parents sing anything, ever. In church, maybe. Tantimego, sacrament, that sort of thing. There was always pitch for trained voices. My father would sing it down there for a very short man. He had a very deep voice.
So they had music, and they'd been exposed to music, but they didn't sing out or play out or play even in the house.
Well, no, I think that's even implying that there was something there to be. No, I think there was the attitude it was a very, music, I suppose, started and finished with, Al Bowley and, crooners and that sort of stuff. That was proper singing.
That was the area. And so you started learning the mandolin at 19. What kind of prompted you to want to...
Oh, sure, the triumphal re-entry of the Clancy brothers, I became aware of the Dubliners, so I wanted to play tunes like Barney McKenna. That's what started that.
So that was the ballad boom era, so that
was the beginning of that. Is that what you're referring to? Would you say that they were the main...
I guess, the Clancy brothers probably predate that, maybe. They're like the late 50s, weren't they? And into the 60s, and then the Dubliners...
early 60s, really.
Then the Dubliners kicked off in the 60s,
Yeah. They were pretty much contemporaneous, really. But, that was the thing to do. It seemed a great way. There was sort of an association, again, a functional association with the music, in as much that we were the Queally boys. We'd go to Queally's. Some of my whatever, you're 12 or 13, purely and simply to chat up the girls, You didn't go around scrutinising the instruments the McCusker Queally band were playing.
Yeah.
Actually, there's one of the McCuskers living in town here, a relation, a niece of the guys who play. I think they're from Armagh.
Up that way.
But it could have been a big metronome there, as long as it beat out the rhythm, you didn't care.
And did playing the mandolin do the trick for you?
In terms of chatting up young women, I didn't need the mandolin. Alan, come on. No, but that was the way, Of course, you'd have an audience, and I realised I could sing in tune, and play 3 chords and the truth on the guitar.
Yeah, so what kind of stuff would you have been... Yeah, you mentioned you were playing stuff like the Coolin, but would you have been playing...
Oh, no, but the Coolin thing that came after, that's 19 or 20. That was when I was about 14.
Okay.
We started, Nicky Carlin played the guitar. I think Jerry probably played.
That's Jerry Cullen.
Yeah, you see, we sang in the choir together with Jerry Cullen, Sean Corcoran. That was the interesting thing about the subsequent album we made.
Yeah, so I might just touch on that. So there's yourself and Nicholas Carlin were in the same class.
No, Nicky was a year ahead.
Oh, so it's you. So maybe might just get the breakdown of that.
Yeah. I was the odd one out, really. So Corcoran, Cullen, Carlin, Campbell, all the C's were a year ahead of me.
And did in school then was it like you formed a friendship based over mutual love of music? Or?
We had Nicky and I had very good mutual friends. He was from the far side of the river, which was very significant in Drogheda. The other side of the river, the far side. They would refer to us as the far side, but there was only one far side really. Everyone knew that. But and I became friends with Nicky as a result of my friendship with his pal, who lived a few doors down.
Yeah, and then so you were playing in those kind of bands, and then later.
No bands.
Yeah.
God Almighty, no bands then.
You were playing?
No, he just was interested. We all tried to play like Hank Marvin or something, try and play Apache solos in the style of Hank. Do you know who Hank Marvin is?
I don't.
You don't? He was the first man to bring a Stratocaster, import a Stratocaster to the UK. He was the lead guitarist with the Shadows.
Don't know. I heard of the Shadows.
Note to self.
Note to self.
Hank was the main man.
Okay. And so would you have travelled down then with the kind of popularity of the Dubliners and trying to emulate or be inspired by Barney McKenna? Would you travel down to Dublin for
No.
music?
You see, meanwhile, I was carted off to England when I was 15. Now that's... Somebody asked me where I lived. I said I was interned in Berkshire for 3 years. Did I say interned? Yeah, I'll stick with that. Because it was pretty... one of the positives, really, was the explosion in interest in, I suppose, offshoots of traditional music, particularly in blues and R&B and rock music. You suddenly became aware of a lot of black musicians through the good offices of the Stones. You know, they're interested in American music, blah, 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 blah. So you had a lot of American performers touring. People you would have had no chance of seeing before that. So that was sort of linked with this sort of folky revival too, you know.
Berkshire. So you spent 3 years there, and what happened after that?
No,
3 years in Berkshire.
I was, before I went to college, I went to university in London. Before that, I'd spent a year teaching in West Africa. But I played a lot of guitar then. Do you know, my guitar playing improved exponentially. But during that period, actually, I remember the Dubliners had reached in the top 10 of the hit parade with 7 Drunken Nights, which was astounding. But in the meanwhile, I suppose, I learnt a couple of tunes from Dubliners LPs. But it wasn't until I heard a sort of one of those, I won't say light bulb moments, or I might be sick, but it's I heard Liam Clancy's solo album, which was, I thought that was wonderful. I realised there was more to singing than sort of endless choruses and whoop, wee, whap, all the rest of it, making a load of noise. Singing songs like The Trees They Grow High and Honor Coon and stuff like that, you know.
And so would that have introduced you to that kind of repertoire?
In a way, yes. Although there were some things, I do recall, there was an Irish speaking, it was like some sort of youth club equivalent when I was in Drogheda. That was the point of call. I did my interset in Drogheda and went to England. So there was a meeting or whatever, difficult to know what to label it. It was called Unrailed, and you'd be a kind of Scoil throughout. And one particular meeting, this woman turned up with what in retrospect looked like a Brennel or an old Ferrograph, you know, with some 10-inch spools, you know. And she was playing from what I recall, I think probably from source singers, as they'd say these days, from Connemara, you know. And it could have been from Mars, really. I don't think I'd ever heard anything quite like that. Do you know? It was that, and it was almost, I mean, it's akin to, I mean, when we were pretentious young 14-year-olds, 15-year-olds smelling our socks, you know, you'd impress young girls by going into the Gino cafe and ordering coffee and cakes, which would be like concrete when you'd chew your way through them, and the coffee was vile. But you learn to love it in a funny sort of way. So there was something inexorably attractive about this singing, you know. And then I said, "Shit, would I ever be able to do that?" You know. And I was always mimicking. I was always whatever, you know, whoever it was. I used to do Adam Faith imitations, and do you remember him? He sang like that. So you'd imitate whoever it was from the day, you know, and which in a way was good practice.
Yeah.
You know, I was always astounded that everyone didn't do that.
And then kind of yourself and your gang of mates like Sean Corcoran and Jerry Cullen, how did you then become aware of or get introduced to the kind of what traditional singers or source singers that were in County Louth?
Okay. I knew, let me see, I was probably about 23, 24. I was still living in London at the time. I knew that Sean Corcoran had I'd done some collecting, and he introduced me to... That's right, I went over to... with the express purpose, I naively thought I'd be able to get access to some of the stuff that he'd recorded. He said, look, he said, I can't even see it myself, DJ. I was DJ for years. I still am to some of them in Drogheda. He said, I can't even listen to the stuff myself, you know.
Who did
Sean, he was the Department of Education, I think. Bale, what's she called? Anna
Bale. Oh,
who's she with?
Is that the National Folklore Collection, as it's called now?
Right, because I saw copies in Corcoran's handwriting, you know, that people got from Anna Bale. You know, so that was back in the early 60s, recorded. Oh, in the late 60s rather. So he introduced me to the Usher family. Which is, I don't know what you know or what you don't know. They were from Tenor, about 3 or 4 miles from Drogheda. And it was a sort of it was a one-off sort of phenomenon, really. These are people, you just didn't bump into Usher families like that, you know what I mean, too often. Who are unique sort of, they learned everything from the father. The source was Pat Usher Senior. I think McMahuna had interviewed him about 1960. I don't know if you're aware of that.
I am, yeah. There's a triple CD that Jim McCardle had.
Ah, right. Yeah.
A lot of it got published, yeah.
Okay.
But yeah.
So that's what alerted Sean. And in turn, I met them and I recorded them in 1974. And that became, the album we put out whenever, 7 or 8 years ago.
That was the Loudmouth's album?
No, that was the Usher family.
Oh, the one you released, yeah.
Pay attention,
archival recordings.
You're going to be examined on this later.
I know it. That's right, no, I have a copy of it at home, yeah. So that was 74, would you have then just actively, after meeting them, learned a lot of those songs? Some, maybe 1 or 2, but no, I didn't dive into it. I've never sung in London So Fair, for example. I've never sung Bold Doherty. It's easier to rhyme off the ones I haven't sung. No, I didn't, in fairness. You know, that's a real problem, I think, that some singers have, is that they tend to be unaware that there's a whole host of other material out there you can sing. Anyway. Yeah. But would meeting the likes of Pat Usher and Mary Ann Carolyn, was she married into that family? Or what was she was a daughter and she married a Carolyn? She was
an Usher.
Yeah.
She married a Carolyn.
Yeah. Would that have, like, meeting all those people and their kind of how they came to learn the music, would that have made you change your approach?
No.
Didn't change your approach to how you thought about songs or
songs? Quite honestly, no. I was, at that point, I'd met a number of the Critics Group fell apart in London around about 68, 69, something like that. And McCall and Seeger went one way and the rest of the Critics Group went the other. And I I met up with the residue, the critics group, who became known as Combine, and I got involved with a number of those people, and I joined what was the Singers' Workshop in London. Now that tried to emulate the way McCall worked with singers, which I think was highly significant for me. You know, that's what really made me think about what I was doing and why I was doing it.
Yeah. And
how I went about choosing songs to sing, and how you emotionally relate and all this, that, and the other. But that was McCall's influence, you know, because he was, you know, his dramatic associations, you know, with Joan Littlewood and what have you.
Yeah, and so that was the Singers' Workshop. Did you ever actually attend any of the meetings of the critics group?
No, it had split up by then. But I have heard on tape, I know the way he operated, I know the way it was, it seems it wasn't for the faint-hearted, you know. You had to be able to take criticism, and of course there was a lot of rancour and what have you, with any group of people like that. Yep. You know, indeed there was. I mean, but you've taken the Singers' Workshop was sort of time limited too. You know, you can only take so much of it. You knew when it was time to.
Yeah, and Jim Carroll and Pat McKenzie, who also live here in Miltown, they were involved in the Singers' Workshop.
They were.
Yeah, and so you were attending meetings in the Singers' Workshop. So you were living in London, and were you gigging at the time?
The odd gig, yeah. I started gigging with Terry Arnell, who was a member of the critics group. I don't know if you've heard any of Terry's stuff.
I have heard some of the recordings. John Howson put out some recordings a few years ago, Connemara's songs.
That what Terry might have recorded.
Terry made the recordings originally.
Yeah, Terry. But some people think that he was just solely a collector. No, I mean, he was a fine singer.
I've never heard him sing.
He was, well, I mean, fine. He was one of the best singers that I knew. So we did the odd gig. I did the odd solo gig, yeah.
What kind of places were you, what kind of crowds were you
folk
playing?
Folk clubs, yeah. That was all the rage at the time.
And would that have been like a solo gig, or would you be performing a night when there'd be like multiple acts performing?
No, the format at most folk clubs would be as follows. You know, Alan would be the guest, you know, like, and Joe Soap might fancy singing. You gave your name to the organiser, and you know, at some point, the organiser would start the evening with a couple of songs, and then have floor singers, and then the guest spot, say 40 minutes, you know, then there'd be a break, and then you'd do it all over again the second half. So the guest would do 2 35, 40-minute spots, you know. And that was the format sort of replicated up and down the country. You know?
And so you lived in London for a number of years, but then you moved towards to Lancashire, was it?
Yep.
And what was the music like up there?
Well, there you go. You see, I managed to avoid the clutches of the Coca-Coltas. And eventually I was ensnared in November. I'm not being funny. That sounds arrogant. I don't mean an arrogant sort of way.
Just last November you got ensnared.
No, if only. No, that was 76. You know, it was so we did Combine. We did a lot of you have to see it in the sort of political context. I mean, it was all highly politicized. You know, this was music this was the only art form created and owned by regular people, you know. So that was, given that underlying sort of objective fact, you know, you sort of worked on that sort of basis. So consequently, we did a lot of sort of socials on both sides of the great divide between, you know, the Trots and Stalinists. You know, you'd have the CP on one side, and you'd have the SWP on the other, or International Socialists as they were then. So you get bookings. I mean, I was no sooner I'd no sooner moved to Lancashire than the phone rang and said, "Was that Dónal Maguire? Listen, I'm from Stockport CP. Can you do something? We're doing a fundraiser for so and so, so and so." And you'd find yourself doing quite a few of these. It was sometimes in the most unlikely company, like Stockport CP, and on 2 different occasions. It was John Cooper Clarke. Do you know John?
I don't.
Oh, John Cooper Clarke. He's a broad Salford. He's a comic. And he does rest. He's a poet. And there's a bit of a revival at the minute in his. You'd hear him on the BBC. You check him out. It's good stuff. Well, the one of the more memorable lines of his, I seem to recall, was, "Well, you never see a nipple in the Daily Express." Which spoke volumes about the politics of the Daily Express. Anyway, he wrote finer lines than that, I can assure you, that's what sticks in my head. So there was that sort of demand, as it were, if you could, whatever, do anything, do a bit of juggling on stage and get people to come along and raise money, you did it. So the cultist people there was an active branch. And it was interesting, that was fascinating in itself, looking at this sort of the MO of cultist branches in England, as opposed to cultist branches here. You could get up at a Ballyjames-Duff cultist meeting and sing, "Come back, Paddy Riley to Ballyjames-Duff," and be roundly applauded. You'd be thrown out if you did that. If you did that, parts of Lancashire. They say, "Oh, it's got to be a traditional Irish song." Well, was that song written across the border and whatever? So no, we're not having that. I remember somebody having to beg because there were some French musician friends of mine they had to lie and say they were our Breton cousins from Brittany, and in fact they were Parisian, in order to play at a bloody cultist session. You had these crazy notions,
Yeah. And would there have been any kind of influence, kind of maybe from McCall's ethics, kind of spilling into the CCE kind of thing, or would that be quite separate? The kind of
cultist, not at all.
Not at all.
God Almighty, no.
But just the way you describe
Wash
it.
your tongue with soap and water.
Yeah.
No, in fact, it showed the politics thing. It's an interesting observation there too. When I look back at the people in grey suits who were important enough to collect the money during 11 o'clock mass on a Saturday in downtown Drogheda. They were, sort of high status members of the community. They were important enough to be collecting the money. You had similar men in dark suits, at the Communist Party functions, performing the same sort of rituals. It was quite funny when I look back at it.
And
so it's a certain unwritten crossover, perhaps.
And what was your own personal take on the influence of McCall? Since you spent so long in the UK and playing music in that environment, what's your own personal take on McCall's influence?
Oh, it's sort of inestimable, I think. It's he was the most impressive character. And funny enough, his prowess as a singer would be down the list. I don't think technically he was a very interesting singer, but the way he was a great performer. You'd sit there amongst the crowd, sitting in the palm of his hand at the Singers Club, The first time I'd never experienced anything, the atmosphere in that place. Because it was all the shared sentiment of the political flavour of it all, and then when he produced the Festival of Fools. See, the idea was, he thought, rightly or wrongly, he thought that the whole function of the critics group would be to set up little epicenters of revolution, and they go off, a bit like Opus Dei. I think they go off and they proselytize, and then the ones that they address, the converted then go out and do the same. And the whole thing mushrooms and we all live happily ever after. I think that was the idea. Whereas Joan Littlewood wanted to be more focused. McCall was married to Littlewood.
I know, before Peggy, yeah.
Yeah. In fact, there was one in between, but a wife in between. But she set up the Theatre Royal in Stratford in East London, and what a lovely war came out of that, and what have you. But McCall, I knew not terribly well, and spoke to him, I don't know, a couple of dozen times over, you know. I was a resident at the Singers Club for about 3 years before I moved to Lancashire in '66. But you had that sort of bifurcation, as I say, the acrimonious split. McCall and Seeger would never appear with Sandra Kerr, John Faulkner and people like that, you know. And they would be performing, you know, and then Faulkner and whatever could be sitting, you know, 6 feet in front of them, and they'd ignore them, having been in each other's pockets for years. It was that acrimonious. So, yeah, his songwriting, you know, the whole, the radio ballad phenomenon, particularly with Charlie Parker, I was fortunate enough to meet. He was an amazing character too. I think there's perhaps an inordinate focus on McCall's contribution to the radio ballads, but it was Charlie's idea, you know, to actually get coal miners talking about coal mining, fishermen talking about fishing. They wanted to employ actors to read the parts that had been spoken by the miners or the fishermen or the travellers or whoever it was. It was, and Charlie said, no, just listen to the lyricism and the language, the use of language, you know, whether from South Wales miners or fishermen from the Moray Firth or whatever, you know. So that combined effort was incredibly impressive. And a lot of the, I was singing songs from radio ballads before I knew there were songs from radio ballads, you know.
And just before we move on from McCall, did he ever give you any personal tips or advice?
Well, that would sound.
Or would you? Or
that would sound.
Did you heed it?
I certainly did, and I probably noted everything. If there's anything he ever said about my performance, I can remember vividly, which was, "I'm too modest to report."
Well, just to come back then maybe actually to the commercial recordings you've done over the years, because the first album you did was The Star Sunday as well, so maybe you could just tell us how that album came about, maybe.
How did that come about? I suppose there was always an unconscious sort of storing away of, well, if I ever did an album, of course I'd like to do an album, but this should perhaps go on it, and that should go on it, and I should record this and record that. And then Robin Morton phoned me up. I got a call from Robin Morton, who was then with... No, he'd just been sacked, actually, from Boys the Lot. But, and he'd put out a couple of albums, Josie McDermott being one. Excuse me.
Packy died now? That was a bit later, maybe, was it? The Packy?
I'm thinking of Sean McAloon and
John
Ray. Yeah, John Ray, the cymbalum player, whatever you... the equivalent.
Dulcimer, yeah. Dulcimer.
Yeah, same as symbolism without the piano legs. So he said, listen, would you like to do it now? And I said, let me think about that for 2 nanoseconds. Oh, all right then. So went up to Shilling Hill, to Temple Midlothian, and he said, oh, Topic will almost certainly take it, and if not, Free Read will take it, and da-da-da-da-da. And none of them took it, because that time, as Nicholas would verify, they put out something like 120 titles or something, and it came a bit of a cropper. So they reined it in, Topic, and Free Read, I think, went tits up, I think. What was his name? Neil Wayne. That he was that, yeah. So, but Robin was incredibly helpful, very, very helpful. I think I may have told you this, but the first thing he did was he sat me down and talked my head off for an hour about what my rights were, what the mysteries of PRS and mechanical copyright and this, that, and the other, which was interesting, and interesting little anecdotes, like for example from Josie McDermott. And he said, "Oh, Josie, I don't know. Did you ever meet Robin?"
I spoke to him one time on the phone.
Well, he's the sort of fella now, Alan. He'd use your name, Alan, there 150 times every minute, Alan, in case he'd forget, Alan. You know what I'm saying? So he reported this conversation, now Josie, you see all these fellas, Matt Malloy and people like this here, now Josie, recording your stuff. Oh yeah, isn't it great, Robin? What an honour, to bestow on me, a humble flute player from Roscommon, that the wonderful blah 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 blah. I was going, never mind that. How about the money? How much money? What? So I think Robin made a few waves in that sort of. This was a story from every record company. You did, and you made no money because you were very rarely, if ever, paid. Anyway, but Robin was dead on. He helped me with all of this sort of stuff you don't think about. You make an inquiry about the cost of pressings. Oh, right. Oh, right. A quid per vinyl, per lump of vinyl. Right, that's I'd sell them for £3. I'll make two. You don't realise, hang on, where am I going to get the covers? You realise the covers are more expensive than the vinyl. And what have you. So Robin saved me the legwork in all of that, and was some very nice things about it, because it was quite well received, that same album.
Mm-hmm. And then you actually had a number of your later releases, you put them out on your own label, Rosendale
Well,
Records.
that's right. That was through Robin's encouragement, Morton's encouragement. He said, put it out yourself, Dónal. So I did.
Yeah, and so you gained that experience from the chats with him. And but was it a venture? Did you ever put out albums for anybody else, or just your own?
A couple, some mates, really. Yeah, I suppose I produced about a dozen, 15, something like that. Oh. I think on Rosendale, there's about 10 or 11.
Okay.
Yeah. About half of them some of my own stuff.
And
it wasn't a commercial. You didn't make any money at it. Good God. There's one above, dare I say, sort of vanity publishing. Of course, it's vanity publishing, but it's, you hope to be, you would be prepared to take it in the neck. Take it when somebody said, "Look, there's a load of shite." You don't go, "Oh no, but no, it's just from my mate. It's just from my Auntie Flo. It's not me, cousin Sheila." It's not for public. No, it is. That was one thing I learned if it goes into the public domain, you're fair game. People can say and do and whatever. And there are noted examples when people should leave well enough alone, who live not a million miles from this spot where I'm sitting, and they enter ridiculous acrimonious exchanges. I think it's because they must have nothing else to do with their time. And then some learned collector jumps in and says, "Come on now, children," spitting out your dummies. Thank you, Tommy. Adding to the confusion. And you think, fuck's sake, what are these people doing? This is all about just singing a few songs when all's said and done. It's not a matter of life and death. But you can't tell that to some people.
Yeah.
I'm sure. No names, not me.
No. Good crack.
You have to laugh.
Yeah, just there's a lot of discussions that go on about about the legacies of musicians, singers, collectors, and then there's a lot of discussion about how the songs are sung and how the songs should be sung. Have you any thoughts and opinions on the tradition from kind of when you first started learning songs, making albums, maybe to how the tradition is transmitted and treated these days? Or
well, I mean, there are always fads, I guess, whatever is. I remember being one of those moments. Dare I use the word moment, meaning a moment? What were you doing? What were you wearing when you first saw Tommy Peoples play the fiddle? So, you can remember that, and then suddenly there's a great rash of people who want to play the fiddle like Tommy Peoples. In the same way, you can point to certain singers who had an inordinate effect, like singing in a sort of syncopated. I'm exaggerating, but sort of we associate with Martin McCarthy. Nick Jones, they had the same little affectations that were mimicked high up and low down, which I think was unfortunate. So you get that sort of thing, and you get the snappiness that, snatching at the ends of lines that I associate with women singing. It's and then we get the raging debates about harmony singing and this other, which has never done anything for me. Because for the simple reason, I don't know how you can get 3 or 4 people, you're singing a song, you're supposed to relate emotionally. It's up to like you may as well masturbate on stage, really. If it's just a question of displaying your prowess as a singer, you can... like pop, it's interesting to see pop singers, like is it Sheryl Crow or somebody, she can do more inverted mordants in a one breath than, whatever angels dancing on the end of a knitting needle or whatever the expression is. You know what I mean? You can cram in as many, as possible to impress. Well, sometimes you can impress by just thinking about and singing. Some of the most impressive performances and some singers I know would hardly use any decoration at all, who wouldn't be flamboyant, whatever, but it's heartfelt and it's... So they're the basic, that's forever true, I think, forever present. I don't think fads may come and go, but that is... In Cotteville, if I was teaching something, I say, well, hang on, work out. Tell me what the song's about. I know, because that happened to me when I joined the workshop. I said, tell me what's that song about? And there was, well, you know what it's about. Oh Christ, have I ever thought about what this song is actually about? Do you know what I mean?
Oh, yeah.
It's like many million kids would be reciting the Hail Mary and they don't realise the symbolism of raising the angel of the Lord, declaring unto Mary. And you say, this is all about sex. What? Wash your tongue. I think probably our parents would still say, what?
Yeah. So the debate and the discussion is about the songs is good and worthwhile then.
Well, of course.
Back in,
Oh, sure. When you and if it makes you think about it, yeah, sure.
Yeah.
That's definitely. And that's one of the most central things about the choice of material is, it's crucial.
And it's interesting what you said, like even after you went to meet source singers like the Ushers, Marion Carlin and Bridget Cumisky, that didn't have such an impact on your development of style, but the Singers Workshop did.
Well, that's an interesting one. I mean, somebody said, I remember I've recorded some big songs. I mean, I was enamoured of Tom Costello, not only of his singing, but as he was a delightful man. And got over to see him in Spiddle as often as we could in the 70s. But of course I sang, and of course a lot of the style would come out there. I remember somebody saying to me, "Oh Christ, are you from? You sing the sort of Shannosy, sort of West of Ireland style, But if I sing Aaron the Green, from a northern singer, there'd be northern inflections in the way, And I didn't. You see this tiresome debate, I think, about am I a traditional singer? I would say that I am not a traditional singer. I sing traditional songs, but that's it. My father's a lorry driver from downtown Drogheda. Do you know what I mean? I grew up listening to rock and roll, listen to 208, just the same as Nicky Carl and the rest of us, That's the way it was. So to go around and suddenly say, oh, because I sing the rocks are bond, it makes me a traditional singer. So I think it's my duty, as a revival singer, and I would always come as a revival singer, because that was the term that was used in England, you know. So you don't have this ridiculous bifurcation and people who should know better, in my opinion, talk about this folk and traditional. What? Folk music and traditional. What are you talking about? It's one and the same thing, for Christ's sake.
Yeah, there's a lot more talk about that now again in recent years, because there's on the kind of the high end of the scale of things, there's like traditional music awards and folk awards, so I think that kind of maybe...
Well, exactly. It's absurd, in my view, but there you go. It's almost like creating for the sake of it, you know, like yet another excuse to, you know, like kids, 4-year-olds dressing up in mortarboards, graduating from preschool.
Yeah. And just one last thing.
It's just ridiculous.
One last thing I want to touch on, or a couple of things actually, maybe is just, I know you went over to the UK at a young enough age, but maybe just the impact and the influence locally of like Carberry's pub in Drogheda.
Yeah.
Just maybe if you could speak about that. I don't know if you spent much time there yourself.
Well, no, because I was in England, but I was aware that this was a place, you know, you could sit down and pretty young girls would sit around in a circle listening to you. Around a campfire out the back at Bandy Carberry's. But fair play to her. It was the only spot in the town. I mean, she too was a bit of a Gaelegor, you know. There was an association with Francie Mooney from Donegal, the father of Mairead. Is it Mairead, the fiddle player? He taught in the Tech in Drogheda, and it was quite the... After Mrs. Carberry, I think, had her eye on him at one point. But they'd be very nationalistic and all the rest of it. And that would be, you go in there and the band would say, Dónal, a rash-a-rish. Rash. What are you talking about? No, but it was the only place you could get a tune, you know? You have a tune or sing a song. The rest tell you to piss off, you know. Yeah. And did do, indeed. That sort of, God's sake, that bog music. You didn't have to go to England to hear it disparaging referred to as diddly dee, you know.
Still to this day.
Oh,
fire,
yeah. Because people were above all that. But the interesting thing, that some of the families you met, you have to be careful what I say. There's, in Lancashire where I lived, there is, every Easter, the Britannia coconut dances. Now, rather controversially, they would wear straw skirts, right? They'd blacken up, and they'd do sort of esoteric little dances of their own that they've been doing for 120 years, you know. And the Staxted Silver Band would accompany them, and you go on like a pub crawl on Easter Saturday along the main road and end up in Bake-Up. And then they would dance. And that was quite a big day in the 70s, 80s. It's died off a bit now. But those guys, they'd be mechanics and bus drivers and stuff like that. And if you actually engage those guys in saying, well, listen, is there an association between the Dorset two-step, you know, whatever, 4.3 litre dance routine they do there, and what they say, what? You know, we just do it, man. We just do it because we do it. Now, there was that attitude. I sing these songs because my mother sang them, and I sang because my grandfather sang them, you know. But you ask me who my favourite singer is, it's Elvis Presley by a mile. You know, you would get that. You know, it's a bit like Tom Lenihan round here saying, oh, what was his favourite song? Or the little boy who's some really weepy, that you wouldn't dream of singing, but yeah, it was his favourite song. I can't remember what the hell was it. So you'd have that sort of one-off thing. And I remember Marianne being, when her daughter sang for us, you know, Mary was sort of, and I was only too happy to record her singing. This wouldn't be now for public. because her daughter Kathleen is still alive, she's nearly 90. But she sang in a sort of country and western sort of style. And Mary Ann was sort of aware that, well, you know, this man hasn't, this man is, I said, no, it's fine, you know, that just, you know. She could differentiate between what she was singing and what her daughter's favourite repertoire, you know. So it didn't always transmit itself, you know. The Usher family would be unique, really, in that there's one or two younger members, one in particular, but it didn't rub off on the rest of them, you know. So there we are.
Yeah, and just last thing, you've done a lot of work on Michael Davitt. How did your particular interest in Michael Davitt develop?
Well, because he lived in, God help us, there was some sort of analogy between his experience. We were both economic migrants. He moved to Haslingden when they were evicted from the farm at the height of the famine, and he worked in a local mill and lost his arm, became politicised. There was a lot of IRB activity. He joined the IRB, ascended through, but he became the Land League history is sort of the father of the Land League at the age of 35, you know, and he was an amazing character, and I think he's sadly neglected, and the film was to try and sort of redress that. There was this similar sort of thing. I researched whatever songs I thought appropriate, songs that specifically mentioned him, and after a lot of farting around, eventually got the thing finished. But he also lived, I discovered him at the first address I had in London, in Battersea. He lived in Battersea Park Road, just down the road. He lived in Haslingden, where I lived for many years. Do you know, there was that sort of crossover. There was a lot of Mayo connection. You came to Haslingden because there were lots of other people from Mayo came to live in Haslingden. Do you know? So the cotton mills, quarries were full of West of Ireland people, you know. So, and each little town had its Irish back. Towns like Blackburn, Burnley, Haslingden, etc., etc., etc. To be all little communities, maybe two or three streets. To be in, rather than now, you'd see the way some Asian heritage people would settle where the people they knew had settled. So that was the David connection.
So you covered a good bit of ground over the years, and now you're living in Miltown. Are you getting to play much music in Miltown these days?
Yeah. Well, of course, the last 2-3 years is a blur, you know. But yes, you could choose, whether good, bad, or indifferent. You know, you could choose to play. You could play 6 nights a week.
Yeah.
You know.
Well, we might, if you're up for it, we might get a song from you now. Would you be
no. Do you mind? No, I'd say that my voice, I would, under normal circumstances.
No panic.
Maybe later on in the week or something, but if you have a slot. But then there is this, whether the local, one of the landlords made me smile. There are people, as you can imagine, people say, oh, you're living in Miltown, Malbay. Oh, isn't it great? I said, oh yeah, music coming out the ear. I said, oh, it must be, yeah. I said, yeah, it's great. So the klaxon sounds at 9 o'clock every morning, you know, and everyone rushes out of their houses, clutching fiddles, flutes, concertinas, and play for 2 hours and go home. And then at 5 o'clock, there's like the muezzin calling the faithful. You know, the klaxon goes, everyone rushes out. Really, is it like that? I said, no, I'm only joking. But people would believe it. And there's also mythology about the wonderful music. I mean, there's very good music and there's shite music. You know, the bell-shaped curve, you know, so
yeah.
that's the way.
Take the highs with the lows.
That's right.